Hello and welcome to the Microbiome Medics podcast. I'm Dr. Siobhan McCormack.
And I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser, and we're your co-hosts.
We are both GPs and lifestyle medics with a shared passion for microbiome science, and we have spent the last 5 years deep diving into the world of the gut microbiome.
We've been analysing the evidence, appraising the studies, speaking to the experts, and writing the Gut Microbiome for Clinicians e-learning course for the BSLM Learning Academy.
We have discovered that the gut and other human microbiomes are pivotal to every aspect of your health and physiology, and the pillars of lifestyle medicine hold the key.
So in these Microbiome Medic podcasts, we'll be covering the basics, bringing you the latest research and talking to the experts on all matters microbiome.
We'll be translating the evidence and packaging it into actionable, bite-sized chunks so that you can harness the power of the microbiome to improve your own health and that of your patients. Hello, I'm Dr. Siobhan McCormack, and this is Microbiome Medics. It's cold, it's dark, it's December, so today's episode's going to be cosy and hopefully have a festive vibe. And who better to help me with that than my microbiome buddy, Dr. Sheena Fraser. Hello.
Hi, Siobhan. Lovely that you turned up this time.
Well, okay. Anyone out there might notice that I did miss the last podcast, which was such a shame because it was brilliant. I listened to it with Daryl Edwards. If you haven't listened, then go back and listen as soon as you've listened to this podcast. Such a shame I missed it. He's great. How was it talking to him?
Oh, I love Daryl. He is an amazing guy. If you ever have the opportunity to do one of his workshops or, just hang out with him and learn about primal play, it's just amazing. So much fun. So, just so entertaining and so good for you. I mean, you just feel great after doing his kind of workouts, but, they're hard, they're tough. It's really good fun.
I did have a look at his website after I listened, and his website is really worth looking at. It's this kind of call to play. And I like the idea in the podcast as well. He said it's not regressing to childhood, this idea of playing. It's actually, he put it something like embracing adulthood. And it's the idea that it's a vital part of being human. I kind of love that. And, playing on your own, playing with people, and you get that social synergy. And there was a quote, where have I put it? Oh, yeah. A joyous rebellion against the drudgery of routine. I just really love that, this informal movement and, playfulness. It's fantastic.
I know. And he inspired me. I think the day after I recorded with him, I went up one of the big hills just outside of Glasgow near Loch Lomond, a hill called the Cobbler. And I was inspired to get my family out into the hills that day and just explore and be really at one with nature again, because all the chat that we had about how important it is to get outside and be in the sun, be in the daylight, and we got an incredible day. It was bright sunshine, blue skies, not even any wind. It was just absolutely stunning. And my moany kids that were upset that they weren't going to get to the gym that morning, actually they perked up so much in the sunshine and in that hill, and we all had an amazing day out. It was absolutely stunning. And then, the next day, everybody was in top form. That feeling that you got from being out in nature for so long and conquering that big mountain, it just stayed with us for days. It was absolutely brilliant. So I thank Daryl for that. I was really, really inspired by him.
Yeah. It reminds me of my dad's got memory problems, been diagnosed with dementia. And last time I was down, I took him to the playground. We always walk past it, but they've got one of these kind of adult playgrounds attached to it, and they've got sort of things you can stand on and swing and move on. And I do see them in lots of sort of city playgrounds, but no one ever seems to be on them. It's kind of outdoor exercise contraptions. And so I kind of took my dad on them and he absolutely loved it. And while we were there, this woman who must have been in her 80s hurried by with 2 huge bags of shopping, wearing a kind of outdoor Mac. and she dropped her shopping, jumped up and just whizzed around these things a couple of times. She was kind of going hell for leather, really, really enthusiastic and really agile. And we were like blown away. We spoke to her later. She was in fact like 92. And I just thought how lovely that she's kind of just on the way back from the shops, jumping on these machines, doing this stuff. And I thought that is lifestyle medicine in action, and, that kind of playfulness and fun. So, yeah.
So, Siobhan, what are we doing this week?
So, Sheena, it's December. It's a year since our first podcast.
Wow.
So, so we've kind of done one a month. I think we've done really well to do that, as well as keeping up our jobs and studies and everything else. So I'm kind of thinking we're feeling a little bit reflective, maybe a bit of a chat about some of the highlights of this year, and also the highlights in terms of microbiome science. It's good to kind of reflect on where it's been and where it's going. And then I thought we could be a little bit festive. I've got a couple of gift ideas for any loved ones out there who are microbiome nerds. I've got a few book ideas for you and a few festive shout outs. So I thought we'd get started with that. Have a think about highlights then, Sheena. What do you, because there's been incredible interest. It always surprises me from lay people, really, how they've fallen in love with this subject, and it's such a good vehicle for talking about people's health.
I know.
And the number of people who've asked us to do talks, I mean, we can't sort of keep up with it, sadly, but what are your kind of highlights from talks you've done or things you've done this year?
It has been a brilliant year. And as you say, lots of people are really, really interested. I mean, I've been blown away at the interest with the podcast. I mean, we sort of started this as a bit of a jolly, having no idea what to do. and it seems to have grown exponentially. So, we're really delighted that so many people are listening to us and are enjoying the content of this podcast, and getting to know their microbiomes seems to really sort of inspire people. And I'm loving that. And actually, it's been a great tool for me as a doctor, because, when I'm talking to patients with medical conditions, I often refer them to the podcast for more information. And so it's been really, really useful for me to be able to have that resource. So that's been great. I've also done a number of different talks, as you have. I mean, we did the talk for the plant-based health professionals earlier in the year, so we made up a talk on cancer and the microbiome, and obviously we did the podcast series to go with that, and that was, it's a really interesting learning for us, but great that was taken on board by plant-based health professionals as part of their Winchester course on cancer. So that was the start of the year, wasn't it? Did you enjoy it?
I did. It's incredibly hard work, though. You kind of think you know this subject, but every time we look at it through a different lens, I almost have to go back to beginner's mind and start again, because that was the remit of that course, which is a really interesting course, lifestyle medicine for cancer prevention and survivorship. And that's sort of Winchester University. And you have to start again and get your head round, well, for starters, the incredible amounts of papers there are to get through and read and try and understand, what cancer is, how this all connects. But it really keeps you on your toes. And I think on the back of that, we were then able to have a really good conversation with Professor Robert Thomas about, cancer and how the gut microbiome fits into that kind of area. That was really good. And then there's the BSLM conference. So that was the metabolic health. So again, we had to kind of start again and look at it from that perspective. I mean, what are your thoughts about?
Yeah, that's been really interesting as well, because diabetes and metabolic syndrome, I think we will do a podcast on this at some stage, but basically we put together a presentation for the BSLM conference on that. And for me, diabetes is such a common disorder now. And it's so lifestyle related that, there's so much we can do to help to prevent diabetes and also to treat it. And, it's wonderful these days because now, of course, we're reversing diabetes. But just to understand some of the physiology and taking it back to sort of microbial level and what all the microorganisms are doing in our guts to help to initiate diabetes in the human body, but also how these microorganisms can be manipulated to benefit us and to reverse our diabetes. It's really fascinating. So that was another really good journey to go on, and certainly the talk was well received at the BSLM conference, and I don't think we had much room in the room when we were presenting again, which is brilliant. And I've given that same talk now to the primary care diabetes conference in Scotland as well, in October, and in fact I gave it again last night in a webinar to another group of doctors.
So just tell me, Sheena, about because obviously when you go to these diabetic conferences, I imagine that the gut microbiome isn't kind of a big voice in the room. How do they take it, or have they had discussions about it before, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a theme to this diabetic conference. For the first time ever, there was a little bit of a lifestyle theme to it. So they were sort of tentatively introducing lifestyle as a more of a proactive measure for managing diabetes, which they haven't really been particularly proactive on before. It's very much been a drug-based approach. So that was interesting to see, because the person that talked after me was actually talking about lifestyle interventions as well. So it was great to be a part of that, and to sort of be showing people a different way, really. I would say that it was a very different crowd to the BSLM crowd, because I think the people that were at that conference were not necessarily so educated and so informed on lifestyle medicine, and so it was a new thing for them, and they were a little bit more taken aback, I think, about the information they were receiving. But it was great feedback afterwards. So I'm enthused that, that's another group of people that we've reached out to, that will hopefully remember some of that talk and remember that, these things do play a role, and hopefully this will help to shape clinical practice in the future.
Yeah, because on the back of the BSLM talk that we did, the Malaysian Lifestyle Conference in December this year, where we have prepared a talk for that, and that's kind of really interesting. Their rates of diabetes, obesity, chronic disease are just escalating in a very worrying fashion, and it's interesting that they were very taken with the whole microbiome. I think Lifestyle Medics they're very open to this kind of idea of us as a super organism, and that we've kind of, our evolutionary biology has included these microbes. So it makes complete sense that they are involved or important in every aspect of our physiology and health. So we've got that coming up as well. But there's also more interesting people contacting us. So there's an organization called Breathworks, which is an organization that looks at mindfulness in chronic pain. And again, very forward thinking in terms of lifestyle and in terms of the gut microbiome. They've asked me to do a couple of talks saying what it was to a big group of people. I think there were about 80 people talking with chronic pain. So this was actually to patients wanting to know about gut microbiome perspectives and what they can do to modulate it, and what the evidence to date on the effect on chronic pain. So kind of really interesting that you've got these different patient groups who are looking at it. And I really like that.
Yeah,
it's great talking to patients.
Well, I was going to say patients and just lay public are really, really interested. I mean, I gave in summer, I gave the talk again at the SOLAS Festival, and the SOLAS Festival is just a beautiful little festival in Perthshire in Scotland. And, it has one stage, and, it encourages a lot of attendance from people who are interested in writing, for example. There's a lot of interesting speakers on things like that, but it also had a really active well-being tent, and I was part of the group of people that were doing talks around well-being, and it was lovely. Had a huge group of people that sat outside the tent and listened to me talking about microbiomes, and people were just full of questions, really, really interested. So I've been delighted at how people are so enthralled by this subject. And I know that that's something that, we've both become aware of. I mean, with another talk that we did down in Manchester with a kombucha firm who were actually at the Solus Festival. They asked us to do a little question answer session for them down in Manchester, which was really good fun. That was lovely going down there, and great for us to be together doing a little session on microbiomes for their company. So that I really enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, that was really good fun. So I kind of agree with you. Lay people, patients really taking this on board, perhaps medics. I do not blame them. The NHS is crazy at the moment. You've got 10 minutes to do a ridiculous amount of work. And the idea of asking people to introduce another completely different perspective does seem daunting. However, that's why we decided to do this gut microbiome for clinicians course for the BSLM. And I'm really pleased that seems to be making waves. It's very popular. It's got a lovely lifestyle medicine approach to it. And we're getting some really positive reviews back from that. And all sorts of people doing it: oncologists, radiologists, nutritionists, dietitians, physiotherapists, to name a few, obviously GPs, nurses. So yeah, really, really positive feedback.
Yeah, I got a really lovely bit of feedback, and I don't know if you've seen it yet because this is from one of the BSLM members in Scotland. So she wrote a little feedback on the WhatsApp group, which I thought was really nice of her. So I'll just read it out because I think it's pertinent just for anybody who is considering doing the course. So she wrote, a few weeks ago, I'd asked for a review on the gut microbiome for clinicians course. Just wanted to come here and say that I'm 70% done with the course and I've really enjoyed it. Almost don't want to get it over with because every module is new information for me. So those of you considering doing it, it's worth it. Very well written and lots of info. So I thought that was great.
Hey. Oh, that's nice. I haven't read that one. That's really nice. Yeah. Well, I suppose this kind of, those are our highlights. But if we just move on now to move on to the Microbiome Science 2023, what are the kind of highlights? I thought it would be quite useful to focus on one paper, which was a perspective paper in Nature, which was published in July 2023 by Alan Walker and Leslie Hoyles, who were at the Rowett Institute in Aberdeen, kind of very highly thought of institute. And it was titled The Human Microbiome, Myths and Misconceptions. Now, this is one of a series of these papers. You get several every year, really, hypes and hopes. And there's a big concern about people overhyping the evidence, coming to wrong conclusions. This idea that we've had 2 decades of this kind of explosion in microbiome science, and it's very fast moving. Lots of money's being ploughed into research. There's thousands of papers every week, as you and I know. We can't, get through them. It's just crazy. The concerns about monetarization of this area, with all these kind of everyone trying to get in on the action, on the bandwagon. And the idea, I suppose, is based mostly on the idea that most of these papers talk about associations, not causation. And if there is causation, then it's usually in animal studies, and people say we're not animals, don't come back to us until you've got some decent human RCTs. Otherwise, we're not interested. I don't know. What are your thoughts about this, or that kind of, you could call it negativity, you could call it actually, it's good to look at the science and challenge conceptions or preconceptions.
And I think you have to remember in medicine and, in science in general, the way that we get our evidence base can be from many, many different sources. And it's funny because medicine really has become obsessed with RCTs. And I think that the problem with RCTs is it just doesn't lend itself to certain types of research. And microbiomes are interesting because everybody's got a unique microbiome. So, giving everybody the same intervention when they've all got very, very different microbiomes is going to lead to a whole load of different outcomes. So, your randomized controlled trials are going to be very difficult to do on human microbiomes. And so, we often look at sort of epidemiological studies, and and various things like that, to find out whether interventions are worthwhile on the long term. But of course, the waters are muddied in these kind of studies, because you don't know what else has happened in that person's lifestyle to influence the microbiome. So we can study these populations of microorganisms, and we can look at various different interventions on them. But then, in comparison to a human microbiome with all sorts of different elements going on in that human being's life, it is very, very difficult to know the true impact of single interventions alongside everything else that's going on there. So, yeah, it's interesting. And I think that we have to recognize that microbiome science might not lend itself to that form of research quite so readily. And we should also remember that things like smoking, for example, there weren't RCTs done on smoking. And because it's completely unethical to do that. But, that doesn't mean that smoking is not bad for you. There are plenty of population studies that have looked at the impacts of smoking. And we know it's well accepted that smoking is harmful for us. But, it doesn't mean that the research done on it is second rate. It's not. So what do you think about research?
Yeah, I suppose I've completely changed my opinion in the last 5 years. Having been a GP for 30 years, I did not have time to read research. I barely did any reading, to be honest. I'm focused on NICE guidelines, which, as we know, for something to get into the NICE guidelines, which are these clinical guidelines that help us make clinical decisions on patients and are really important. There are lots of concerns that people have with them, though. One being that it can take, someone has estimated the average time is something like between 10 and 17 years for something to make its way down from research into NICE guidelines. There's this huge time lag. It only can include certain types of things. And as you say, RCTs, randomized controlled trials, where you're comparing a control with an intervention. And these trials are normally focused on pharmaceuticals with one pathway, one outcome, and hugely expensive. So people are not going to be doing the trials on things like food and nutraceuticals and, those sort of things are being missed out, really. And I suppose I agree, have to look at microbiome science. You have to look at the totality of the evidence. And that does mean taking in, the huge amounts of evidence from animal studies as well as epidemiological studies. It'll be interesting to see where AI is going to come in, trying to amalgamate all this information as well. And I suppose when people say, well, we're not mice, it's kind of a really interesting area, because we're getting these weird studies on mice and men. So you get these weird studies where, for example, the idea of taking the stool from two twins, human twins, the two female twins, one who suffered from obesity, the other was lean, and transposing those fecal microbiomes into mice. And then the mice who'd received the obese microbiome became put on weight, and the other mice remained lean. So this idea of translating from human to mouse studies and backwards again, it really is kind of quite incredible and a little bit, mind-boggling, I guess. But I think this is an area where we do have to take all the information, and it's fast-moving. And, I think we have to look at it all. I suppose my hope for this area is just this idea of our evolutionary biology. Apart from anything else, we should just be stepping back in wonder and awe at the incredible idea of us being this planetary ecosystem that carries around these human microbiomes that likely have enormous influence in our health and physiology, and have co-evolved with us. Some of them may be commensal, some of them pathogens, but most of them, could potentially be beneficial. And the effect that they have on our immune, our brain development, our metabolism is kind of, at the very least, incredibly interesting. So I do feel excited and hopeful for the future. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny, when I read that paper in the summer, and I remember my dad sent it to me because he sends me a lot of articles on the microbiome, just in case I've missed them.
Yeah, just
And
Sheena, just remind, or well, tell everyone, because your dad's slightly scary. He's not like my dad at all. My dad left school when he was 14 and is, uh, uh, knows nothing about the microbiome. Your dad is slightly more,
yeah, no, he's good
academic.
because he's pretty up on it and he's interested. Actually, my mum's more interested in microbiome than my dad is, I would say, because my mum's got a degree in microbiology. But my dad was quite involved in helping us research, find me articles. He's still got access to papers that I don't have access to as a lowly doctor. He's got a sort of access through the university because he was a university senior lecturer, so he has a greater access than I did. So he got me some papers that I couldn't access. So he's been a great help over the years. So he sent me that paper, which was the Walker and Hoyle's The Human Microbiome Myths and Misconceptions paper. And I think he was thinking, Sheen, have you got everything right on this microbiome front? And so I went through that paper with a fine tooth comb thinking, oh gosh, what have I got wrong? We just finished writing the course and I thought, we've done a really good job here. I feel like we've researched it to the nth degree, but, what have we got wrong? Because, the paper was quite negatively slanted. It was basically saying that there's an awful lot of hype around microbiomes and that most people are actually getting it all wrong and their information is all wrong. And, they're getting all of the details incorrect about, the amount of organisms in your microbiome and the weight of your microbiome and various other things. So I remember going through it and actually ticking off all of these points that he was making just to make sure that we'd got everything correct for our course. And actually, I was really delighted that we had. But I think it's interesting because I don't have the same negativity that I felt came across in that paper about microbiome science being taken on board by the public, because generally speaking, people are really, really interested in helping their microbiomes and they're just looking for a little bit of support in doing this. I suppose they're concerned that people are taking hold of this and actually giving people the wrong information, making them take probiotics at great expense that may not be very well it may not have great efficacy or safety, and I suppose that's a real concern. So we don't want for a lot of people to jump on the bandwagon and give all the wrong information. But at the same time, I'm pleased that people are starting to take note of their microbiomes and actually want to look after them. And I think some of the general messaging that is out there in social media is relatively good about increasing diversity of plants in your diet and utilizing fermented foods a little bit more. So I think that these messages are fairly good. I'm a little skeptical on the probiotic front just yet because I think there's still more work to be done on that front. But there are some really interesting things coming out on probiotics, and there's certainly conditions that I would use probiotics. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting paper. And Shiv, what was your thoughts when you read it?
I did the same as you because you sent it to me and someone else did as well. And it can feel a bit like, hey, Shiv, have you read this? You're out of your depth, listen to what these guys are saying. I, like you, was really pleased because the first few bits were about definitions and the history of it and how much your gut microbiome weighs and various things like that, kind of numbers game, which some people might say is kind of small fry. But I like the fact we've got the scientists who want everything to be absolute. And their point was, if we're not accurate about the small things, then how can people trust us to be accurate about the big things? And actually, we're quite nerdy about this. And we have kind of sent these messages to various people when they've got definitions wrong. I think we were on it about the definitions and about the various weights and, grams and whatever. So I'm not going to go into that. But more interesting are these big concepts. I hope in the course particular that we've really pushed forward the idea of this ecosystem, that it's basically a lot of the science is much more ecologically focused than Western medicine focused. So there's this idea of this Amazonian rainforest, some people say, in our gut. If you think of it like that, you don't fall into lots of the traps that we do with Western medicine. For example, we want, is it a good bug? Is it a bad bug? If it's a bad bug, antibiotics. If it's a good bug, then, what can we do with it? Probiotic it. And it was really nice that they went through that, because ecosystems don't work like that. We don't have jungles with good and bad insects or, animals or fish in it. It doesn't work like that. And a good example they gave was Clostridium difficile, which as Western medics and GPs, we throw up our arms in horror because we know it's associated in old people who've had multiple courses of antibiotics with this terrible chronic diarrhea, and you can become very poorly with it, and it's very difficult to treat, or was until recently. But this idea that therefore C. diff, as it's called for short, is bad is simply not true, because you and I probably carry it asymptomatically, and throughout our lives it probably won't cause a problem. For all we know, it could be doing some good there. We simply don't know at the moment. It's only in particular circumstances or contexts, for example, repeated courses of antibiotics in people who have less strong immune systems anyway, for example, the elderly, that it becomes a problem. So I kind of think that's a really good lesson for all of us. And H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, is another good example as well, where there's thought to be lots of evolutionary related reasons why it might be beneficial, but it can be negative in certain circumstances. So there isn't a good cop, bad cop situation here. And I think we just got to take it in the sort of ecosystem way approach. I think it is the best way to look at it. So I don't know if you've got any sort of thoughts about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when it comes to these bacteria, they're really interesting when they're in small numbers. They behave very differently. And it's when the numbers grow, like in the case of the E. coli, for example, once the numbers grow beyond a certain threshold, that's when they start to be able to communicate with each other by this amazing thing called quorum sensing. And once the bacteria sort of can communicate with each other, they can start releasing toxins. And so E. coli is another fascinating one that kind of lives in our guts really happily and almost certainly performing lots of very good functions for us day to day, maybe helping us to keep other harmful microorganisms down. And there's all sorts of different mechanisms by which these bacteria can benefit us. And as you say, we don't fully understand all the ways yet. But yet, if you allow that population to grow too much, and they start to communicate with each other and they start to release toxins, and then you're in a very difficult situation with that bacteria. Then they become harmful and pathogenic, and that's where you get disease. So yeah, it's it's really, really interesting, and it's important to view that whole ecosystem. And we still don't know what a really normal, healthy ecosystem should look like. There's still a lot of confusion over that, because there's no absolute right ecosystem. There's probably a whole load of different ecosystems that work very, very well together, but they'll have a different makeup of different microorganisms. And so, I imagine we'll get to the stage eventually where we kind of have an acceptable range of ecosystems rather than one specific one we're aiming for. And then, what microorganisms we're aiming to get into that ecosystem, rather than, one specific type. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's good that scientists are constantly questioning these things, because it's important that we don't stand still in science. We have to constantly look forwards and backwards and say, well, what do we do? What do we know, and what do we need to know, and question the things that you thought you knew. Because if we don't do that in science, then we never come up with all the new amazing stuff. So it is good that these papers are being written, and it's good to question where we're going with everything. But I don't think that should put us off, because I think the reality is that you and I in our day jobs are now practicing very different medicine to the medicine that we used to practice pre-knowing anything about microbiomes. How's it affected you, Shiv? Has it changed much of what you're doing as a GP?
Yeah, it's definitely changed my perspective and how I talk to patients. the whole story of the gut microbiome seems to be really attractive to people. And it's just a much easier way to explain to people what's going on, because everyone has kids or family or a garden or pets. So as soon as you talk about their health in terms of looking after their gut garden or their Amazonian rainforest, people immediately understand. And you don't have to explain everything in great detail after that, because they say, right, what do I do? How do I look after it? That makes sense. They go off with a smile. It feels non-judgmental. It, really brings lifestyle medicine into it. And people seem really engaged. They've read about it in magazines. They've heard about it on the radio. They have just never heard their doctor talk about it. So, I mean, what about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I was at an antibiotic utilization committee meeting this week, and I've been going to these meetings for about a year now, and this is a great meeting. I mean, amazing groups of doctors and nurses and pharmacists that attend this meeting each month or so, and basically they're responsible for really trying to find out more about antibiotic prescribing and trying to home in on really tightening up antibiotic usage, which is fantastic. It's a great group. And they've made incredible progress over the years. They used to have incredibly high numbers of people presenting with C. diff, for example, which is really down to overuse of antibiotics in frail and elderly populations. And nowadays, it's really, it's quite a rare disorder to get now, because they've made so many interventions in antibiotic use. So it's brilliant. It's a really good group. But the one thing that's been lacking from that group is discussions on prevention of infections, for example. And I find this really, really interesting, because whilst these clinicians and specialists are really, really interested in getting the quantity of antibiotics that we use down in our communities and in our hospitals, they're not. At the moment, they're not prepared to consider how we would then prevent the original diseases and the infections in the first place. And I think this is really, really interesting, because this all comes down to lifestyle interventions. So, you're more likely to catch infections if you are sleep deprived. You're more likely to catch infections if you have a terrible non-nutritious diet, especially like a sort of hospital diet. And you're more likely to catch infections when you're sedentary and when you're very stressed. And of course, these infections are going to be much more virulent if you're very unhealthy. And of course, in the UK and in Scotland in particular, where I live, vitamin D levels are incredibly low in a lot of the population. And we could be enhancing vitamin D levels. We could be enhancing people's lifestyles to help improve their general well-being. That will improve their gut microbiome if they make all these changes as well. And with that, of course, the immune system will be heightened and will be better able to cope with disease and infection. And in fact, one of the reasons why we did so badly with COVID is because we've got quite a sick population of people within the community. We've got high rates of obesity, high rates of chronic disease, terrible diets, sedentary lifestyles, stressed individuals. And of course, all of these things contribute to the severity of the infections that you end up getting. So, I would like to see more discussions around what we can do, where, why can't we put more funding into preventative measures to improve people's general health and well-being, so that they then don't get the same number of infections, and then we don't need to use the same amount of antibiotics. It seems like something that we've been sort of missing in the medical community for a while now. What do you think, Shiv? Have you experienced that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, interestingly, the course I missed your wonderful podcast with Daryl is because I was on a course at Surrey University. I'm doing a master's in nutritional medicine, and the course there was on micronutrients and the number of people in the UK who are deficient in various micronutrients and how important these things are. You talked about vitamin D, other vitamins, but also zinc and calcium, copper, all these things that people are deficient in, selenium, particularly as well as regards the sort of immune system. All these things are incredibly important in all the aspects of your immune system functioning. And there is this big concern that we may be larger than people want us to be. The BMI is increasing, but actually we're deficient So we're actually undernourished in some ways and overnourished in other ways. And it's kind of really interesting idea that, we need to be looking at the micronutrients as well. And the gut microbiota are a hugely important part of your vitamin synthesis. And they think they're very important in the how you cope and absorb your minerals as well. So yeah, it's another interesting area. But just going back to this paper, Sheena. So we've talked about, I like us rambling down different pathways with this. It's kind of, I like it. We don't normally do this, and it's really nice. This is how we talk normally, isn't it? The another thing they were talking about was this paper with Walker and Hoyles about the fact that everyone says the gut microbiome is inherited from your mother, and they're saying, well, it's not. Very few of these microorganisms persist from birth till adulthood. And I suppose it is important to say that when you are born by vaginal delivery and when you are fed breast milk, that you have these really important, we'll call them, or we do in our course, call them pioneers. So these first to the gut bacteria, usually, that we talk about, they may not stay across the lifespan, but they certainly are really important pioneers because they shape the environment and attract other beneficial microbes to the gut microbiome, the developing gut microbiome. And going back to immunity, as we've just been talking about, this is a kind of really important time in infancy for you to be collecting the best group, the best team to take you forward, and it's a really important part of your immune development. So it is this kind of, this first 1,000 days is a really important time for this carefully orchestrated layering, if you like, of these different microbes. So one lot come along, and then that alters the environment, which allows another lot to come along, which then allows another lot to come along. And it's really incredibly complex and not fully understood. But I do think it's important to understand that it's not just whether you were born by vaginal delivery and whether you were breastfed. It's also those important factors in infancy. So whether you siblings, pets, we call it sort of playing in the dirt, but really playing in the earth. I mean, no one wants people to play in, where there's loads of pathology or pathological bacteria, but we're talking about playing outside in nature, in the earth, what food you eat, and what you don't eat. We don't want people having ultra-processed foods, which are poisonous to the gut microbiome as well. So I would agree with the paper from that point of view, that it's not just the beginning. It's kind of particularly in infancy, but across the lifespan, you get these windows of opportunity where you can change and improve, hopefully, your gut microbiome composition and therefore its function and therefore your health. So that, again, is a really hopeful thing about this area, I think, as well.
Yeah, great. No, I agree, and I think there's still an awful lot we have to learn about microbiomes, human microbiomes, and I think that's the exciting thing for us because we're constantly on a learning journey. But that doesn't mean to say we can we have to stop what we're doing and not dare talk about microbiomes. I think that we should talk about them, and we should talk about enhancing them, and we should talk about them in relation to disease. I mean, after all, for example, the research on immunotherapy, has shown, such an improvement in outcomes if you take note of the human microbiomes and if you try to enhance populations of certain organisms. And I think that it'd be very unfair for people going through immunotherapy now to not know this and to then not have the opportunity to alter their diet to try to enhance their gut microbiota and encourage more of these beneficial microorganisms that might actually give them a greater fighting chance with their immunotherapy. So it's all very well waiting for science to find out more and more and more, but I think if we don't react to the stuff that we know already, then there's an awful lot of people that might miss opportunities with diseases to self-help and self-cure. So there's an awful lot we can act on, and I don't think that our colleagues listening to this should be put off by the fact that there's still an awful lot to learn. Get out there and learn what you can, and do our course if you want to learn more, but essentially there's an awful lot we already do know.
I think it's a great subject for lifestyle medics because all the arrows do seem to be pointing in the same direction. This makes sense if we co-evolved with these microbiota, that actually the things that make us physiologically well or function properly, so sleep, connectivity, nourishment, good mental health, time in nature are the things that seem to be good for the gut microbiome as well. And that does make sense. So there is a lot simple things that we could be doing that, okay, so say we don't know for certain that they will definitely change your gut microbiome for the better. There is a wealth of evidence in terms of lifestyle medicine evidence that they are beneficial for multiple other outcomes. So it kind of seems to me like a no-brainer. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You're going to improve your cardiovascular health. You're going to improve your metabolic health. You're going to improve your mood. I mean, what's not to love, really? But there was one thing that I thought was good that they brought up, was this idea that that stool analysis, DNA analysis of the stool is a perfect tool and unbiased. And I do think that's really important for people to understand that when you're taking a stool sample, it's just one sample at a point in time. It might be different the next day or different later in the day. You're also only collecting the stool that comes out of you. And a lot of the microbiota continue to stick closer to the mucosa and never come out in the stool, so are unrecognized, or they're stuck down in the crypts and hidden, if you like. And also it depends on the transport and the storage and how you collect it, the lab methods, the way they do DNA extraction, and this idea of, big data. All this information is going into these reference databases. So, we still don't know so much. It's really it's easy to sort of think, if they're sort of computer-based data, that it must be accurate. And actually it isn't. There's still a lot for us to understand. And that's why you and I believe that doing a one-off stool analysis is not a particularly helpful for tool often. So I thought that was important.
Absolutely. So Shiv, should we move on to our book club?
Yes. Oh yeah. Let's get festive. I feel we've been a bit kind of, we're hopeful, but we are definitely, looking at both sides of it. Okay, so book club. So anyone who's looking for a book to give to their loved ones, if you happen to have someone, there's certainly no one in my house who would be happy to receive one of these because they're fed up talking about microbiomes. But there's this new book by Dr. James Kinross called Dark Matter, the New Science of the Microbiome, which was published the latter end of this year. He's really interesting, consultant colorectal surgeon in Imperial. He's also been researching the gut microbiome for a long time as well. And he talks about dark matter. I like this. It's kind of a cosmic analogy, these invisible, undetectable particles that influence everything, but we don't know what they are. And he's calling the microbiota these biological dark matter. And actually that does make sense because there's so much we don't know. We still haven't even begun to look at all the viral particles and fungal particles and all that other stuff that's out there. This really is the beginning of our knowledge in this area. It's an excellent book. It takes you through the history. Gives you a really wide perspective, and talks about housing and antibiotics and everything that we talk about, really. But it's fantastic, really good read. It's quite a weighty tome, so don't give it to someone who's doesn't like really serious stuff. But for your kids, and actually for the kids in you, this book, I love this book. There's a Zoo in My Poo. It's by Felice Jacka and her husband, Rob Craw, who I think is a musician and an artist. He illustrated it. Oh, God, I love this book, Sheena. It's like Dr. Zeus. She is a professor of nutritional psychiatry and director of food and mood in Australia. She's written a couple of books on it, and she's kind of serious scientist. But this book is amazing. It's for kids. It's joyful and lovely, and there's lots of poetry in it. But my goodness, the research evidence is top notch. It's incredible. They've actually got a kids' version of the Bristol stool chart. Okay, they talk about the gut-brain axis. They've got recipe section. They've got zoo poo stew. They've got farty toast. But it's fun, it's lovely, the illustrations are beautiful. But I tell you, this is like bang up to date on the evidence. They have even, Sheena, they talk about bile, and they talk about Bilophila wadsworthia, which most, microbiome scientists won't have heard of. It's this kind of, it's got negative connotations for your health, but this bug that loves bile and suggesting why you shouldn't have lots of ultra-processed, fatty, bile-producing foods. And I just thought, wow, the idea that some 6-year-old kid's going to be talking about bile and the Bristol stool chart and all sorts of evidence-based stuff is incredible. So it's kind of for kids, but it's one of those books that's for kids, but really, I'm going to read it again, because every time I look at it, I'm kind of blown away by how evidence-based it is. So those are my two. And have you got one to put in there?
Yep. So on the kids side, obviously, I chose a slightly different book to you, not on the microbiome this time, but on movement. So I've chosen the Children's Animal Moves book by Daryl Edwards, my guest from last week or last month. And why I love this, just because it's got his passion and it's got all of his lovely sort of primal play moves in this book, and it's all about teaching children to be really free, use their imaginations, use movement to have fun, to play, to enjoy, and to get so much more out of your bodies and your life. And it's fantastic. It's full of, it's entertaining both for adults and for kids, because of course, as a parent, you can join in with your kid and do all of these moves, and that's great fun for everybody. So I think that's a wonderful book to give as a Christmas present if you have any kiddies that you think might enjoy that. So I'll certainly be considering that for my little nephews. And the other one I wanted to mention for you, Siobhan, was actually a cookbook. And it's kind of part cookbook and part information book. So it's by Dr. Alan Desmond. And Alan Desmond is a consultant gastroenterologist from down the south of England. And I first saw him actually giving a talk on microbiome a few years ago now, I think, for BSLM. And he's heavily involved with the plant-based health professionals. And so he's written a brilliant book called The Plant-Based Diet Revolution. And it's, as I say, it sort of gives you lots of information on the microbiome. So it talks you through a lot of the sort of, common knowledgeable sort of stuff on microbiomes, human microbiomes, and what they need and everything. And it's really easy to read. So it can really be recommended to anybody who doesn't have a degree in medicine or in science. And then it talks through sort of examples of healthy, more plant-based cooking. Now, I would say though that this is a plant-based cookbook. And what I like about plant-based cookbooks, because I'm not plant-based, I still eat lots of meat, but I like to use some plant-based cookbooks just to give me more variety in my diet of plants. So for me, I like to recommend this book because people are often a bit kind of like, well, what do I do with vegetables? And what do I do with these things? I'm not sure. How do I get more interest out of these different vegetables and plants? And this is a great way of doing that because there's some really great recipes in there. And so it's useful. When we're trying to encourage people to put more plants into their diet, I think this is a great way. But I do always tell people that, it is difficult to have a fully plant-based diet. So if you're not fully into that, I wouldn't recommend it. And I would, recommend sticking with some meat and some fish as your protein sources if you're happier with that. But just have more balance there with a greater variety of plants. So yeah, that's a great book to consider. I don't know if you'd be interested in a book like that, Siobhan.
I really like him. I've seen him do a couple of talks. He's really kind of passionate and brilliant the way he talks about things, preventative medicine. And again, he's a gastroenterologist who's talking about preventing colorectal cancer. He doesn't want to be sitting there diagnosing it, and he's really passionate about that. And he's brilliant. So that sounds fantastic. So Sheena, we've got to do Microbiome Medics Secret Santa at the office. It's not going to be that secret, is it? Because there's basically two of us and Chris, producer. Hi, Chris. Shout out to Chris. So we only decided, hey, why don't we give each other a bit of a gift like 2 days ago? And I slightly unfairly had a brilliant idea because I wanted to give you something, but I didn't know how to get it to you. So I got something delivered to you this morning Did it arrive?
It did arrive, and I am
It
really
did.
impressed
Okay.
with your organizational skills because unfortunately yours is still in transit. So apologies.
Do you know what? Yeah. I'm surprised this got to you because we did only decide. Okay, go on then. Open
Okay,
it.
right.
Has it actually? Well, maybe it's open. Has it got
It
paper on
has
it?
got
Oh
paper,
yes, it
and I am
has. Okay,
opening
go
it
on.
like normal.
Rip it open to make it sound really. Oh wow. Okay.
Oh wow!
Chris is going to have to do something with that sound. So I mean, okay, I've been doing kombucha for a year and we've been talking about it and we've been talking about these scobies, which everyone's probably a bit bored with me going on about it now, these symbiotic colonies of bacteria and yeast, which look like these plate-sized kind of jellyfish type things that you have to put into your drink to make this beautiful thing called kombucha. Anyway, I've been growing one for you, but I thought I'm like 500 miles away. How do I get it? And I was trying to put it in things. I thought it would leak everywhere. And I thought, who do I know near you who will have one? And I thought, Janice Klein. I mean, this is a crazy subject. How many people in their address book have someone who might have a spare SCOBY? So I rang Janice Klein, who any people listening, if you haven't listened to the podcast with her, it was brilliant at the beginning of the year on fermented foods. She is the most passionate lady about this subject, the queen of fermenting. Anyway, she lives fairly near Sheena in Glasgow. I rang her up yesterday and I said, you don't happen to have a spare SCOBY? I mean, what kind of person would ring up? And she goes, it just so happens. Anyway, so tell me what she's given you.
So
What is it? What is it?
Yeah, so I'm going to go through this. So what I have got is I have got one SCOBY, or I don't even know if that's one.
Yeah.
It looks blooming enormous, right? It's in a.
Let's have a look. Hold it up, because then I can see.
It is whopping.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
It's whopping.
So it's in a beautiful little jar, a little fermented jar. And then I have got some sugar.
Gotta have sugar for fermenting. All disappears, guys. Anyone who's worried about the sugar content,
I have got some organic green tea bags, and I have got some superfruits flavoring tea as well.
Wow.
And also a hibiscus and sea buckthorn kombucha.
Right, so that must be Janice's very own. So this is Janice from Nourished by Nature. Shout out to Janice at Nourished by Nature. Janice, you're amazing. Faster than the speed of light, faster than Amazon. I mean, this woman is something. Yeah, it is. So we'll shout out to you, Janice, and we will put your details at the bottom because we love what you do.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that's so good.
Beautiful present. Thank you so much for that.
So Sheena, as the thing, I have to give you something meaningful. And I just thought you can get going with kombucha and then we can do an episode on kombucha, early in the year, next year. Our very own. So happy Christmas.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And that gives me something to do with my small amount of spare time. So that's brilliant.
Thanks for nothing.
So I did get you a gift. And because yours hasn't arrived, I'm just going to tell you what it is, okay? And why I got you it. So again, I'm sort of thinking of something to enhance your gut microbiome. So it's a bit of a theme here. So what I have got for you, and because I know that you love being outside as well, is I have bought you a couple of black currant bushes.
Wow, that's so lovely.
And the reason why I've got you that is because I truly think that black currants are absolutely incredible for our gut microbiomes, but also for our general health, because they're just amazing fruits. They've got incredible amounts of fiber. Because of the skin pigmentation, they've got that incredible pigment in the skin that really enhances your cardiovascular health. They're packed full of polyphenols that are truly antioxidant and really fantastic, and obviously will enhance the population of bacteria in your gut. And I'm absolutely certain that in my family, one of the reasons why people in my family live quite healthy, long lives is because we eat a lot of black currants. And so we all have lots of blackcurrant bushes in our garden, and each year they produce without you having to do anything to them. They love the soil in the UK. They're really easy to grow. In fact, I don't even do anything. I don't even prune my blackcurrant bushes, which you're probably supposed to do. I just leave them to it. And every year I get a massive bounty of blackcurrants, and I put them into my freezer. And then for the whole of the winter period, I have incredible blackcurrants to stabilize my arteries and to give me all these lovely polyphenols throughout the winter. So that's my gift to you, Siobhan, and I hope that you will benefit.
Oh, Sheena, I will. That is so lovely. I love our gifts to each other. No one else will understand, and everyone would be probably incredibly disappointed by those gifts. And I know that both of us are just really happy. We're sitting here smiling stupidly. I'm really excited about that. So I'm going to leave you to finish up, but just very quickly before you do, Sheena, we're just big shout out to our guest Janice. Came up trumps this morning. We love you. Daryl Edwards, brilliant. Professor Robert Thomas and Dr. Anastasia Theodosio, who told us all about microbiotoxicity, which was an incredible podcast. Thank you all. And thanks to Chris, our producer, as well.
It's been a brilliant year and we have learned so much, and I'm genuinely excited about next year and what that year is going to bring for us, because we're getting all these incredible people onto our podcast teaching us incredible things about microbiomes, and that's exciting. It's enhancing our knowledge, it's making us better doctors, and I think that the more I learn, the more I realize I need to know. So it's an incredible learning journey, but I'm loving every minute, and I'm loving this podcast, and these conversations, which are just so stimulating, and I'm really looking forward to more of that. Before we finish, what's your New Year's resolution, Siobhan?
Okay. I'm looking at this book with Daryl Edwards on, because I've got the Animal Moves book as well, because it's absolutely incredible. Do you know, I'm going to go for play. I was thinking that after I listened to the podcast, I fancy getting a skipping rope, a hula hoop, doing a bit of tree climbing, unleashing the transformative power of play. I'm gonna rock my Daryl Edwards. That's what I'm going to do in the new year. What about you?
Brilliant. I am going to get outside more, okay? Because again, I was a bit inspired by Daryl, and I just loved being out in the mountains. And this is the first year where in the summer, rather than going up north, because we've got a house up in the northwest of Scotland, that's where we've been every year. And every year I've had my fix of 2 weeks up there in the summer, of doing lots of hill walking and swimming in the sea and cycling. And this year I didn't get that, and I really missed it. And I have to say, I want to get back to nature a little bit more. I want to do more hill climbing. And I just want to get out into nature more during the week, just in my average week. I haven't been walking as much, and I'm missing it. I'm missing watching the seasons go by, being closer to nature. So that's my New Year's resolution. I should probably be a little bit more smart and specific about what I'm going to do. And I'll probably add in an extra walk into my week, so that I'm getting out into nature at least once a week, and doing a fairly longish walk, an hour at least, where I can sort of see the seasons go by nicely. Well, I think that's our Christmas episode all done. I've really enjoyed our chat today, actually. It's really nice just to have an opportunity to talk to you, Siobhan, because I know you're so passionate about the microbiomes, and it's just great to be able to bat a few things back and forth with you. And I always learn so much when I'm chatting to you. So thanks again. Merry Christmas, Siobhan. Have an amazing one when it comes. And hopefully, we will see you all in the new year, and we'll have more exciting podcasts for you all from January onwards. So take care of your gut microbiomes over this festive period. Look after them well, and we'll see you in the new year. Take care. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Microbiome Medics podcast. We really hope you enjoyed the content, and we welcome your feedback. We'd love to hear any suggestions you might have for microbiome topics that you'd like us to cover, And we also appreciate listeners' questions and will endeavour to answer them in the next podcast.
So if you want to progress this learning further, look at the Gut Microbiome for Clinicians. It's an online course on bslm.org.uk, which will take you on a much deeper dive into the gut microbiome.